Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Curious on Earth podcast. I'm Henry Soinuma. I'm a writer, musician, and amateur generalist from Finland. And today, my guest is theory artist Emil Ejner Friis, who is a co-founder of the Metamodern political and philosophical think tank and one of the minds behind the Nordic school or political style of Metamodernism. What Metamodernism actually is not that simple question to answer. It can be thought of as an attractor or a memeplex or a group of ideas, ways of thinking about, ways of being in contact with the world. And yeah, I've found metamodern, how would you say, like the metamodern sensibility or approaches. Maybe plural is better. It's approaches and sensibilities because there's no one singular metamodernism, but I've found them to be quite valuable in making sense of the world and of my experience of the world. What metamodernism is about is challenging to define, but it's got to do with embracing polarities, embracing paradoxes. It's about multi-perspectivality on the world, how you can listen and integrate different points of view to the world, how you can develop your ability to listen to different kind of stories that people tell about the world, about their experiences in life. And the political school of metamodernism is also about how to build a society that supports people's healthy development and growth, how we can flourish more in the world, how we can increase our capabilities of making sense of the challenging, complex problems we encounter in the world. I just heard a term from Peter Lindbergh, who is the steward of the STOA project. I can't recall who he was quoting, but I heard the term existential ultra catastrophes as a description of what we're facing. So yeah, I think one of the most important abilities for us to develop in this current situation is learning how to cooperate and support each other in growing into directions that will help us to become the best versions of ourselves, and also like thinking about how the structures of our society would need to develop to minimize the amount of hindrance that they cause to our development. How to work toward a society that supports our growth instead of limiting it. And yeah, that's just a tiny part of what political metamodernism is about, and I cannot do it justice by this explanation, but I just recommend you jump into the discussion and find out for yourself. And just to let you know, the podcast is available in many providers through YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, many of the most used podcast providers. But if there's some that are missing that you'd like to see the podcast on, please send me a message, and I'll do my best to submit the podcast there too. And you can follow the podcast on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And also, if you want to more intensely support my work, you can become a Patreon subscriber. So those in my Finnish audience might know that I already been running a Finnish Patreon for quite a while, but this is a new one, so this is in English, and you can find it on Patreon through patreon.com/curiousonearth. And pidemmittä puhetta, let's get into my discussion with Emil Ejner Friis. Okay, welcome to the second episode of the Curious on Earth podcast. Emil Ejner Friis, theory artist. Your work with Metamodernism has been quite influential for me because it's sort of broadened my toolkit of different maps for making sense of the world. And it's really good to have you as the second guest for this podcast. So I think we could directly head for the concrete aspects of what metamodernism is about. So you've been involved in 2 books on metamodernism called The Listening Society and The Nordic Ideology, written by the philosopher Hanzi Freinacht. So I think the title of the first book, Listening Society, is quite a good place to start from. So could you elaborate or give a brief discussion on what a listening society is?
Well, I believe that a lot of people, they feel alienated and in society because they feel they have no voice, and that they feel they live in a society that doesn't take enough considerations to their needs, especially their emotional needs. So what we are talking about here is a society that listens to what the actual needs are of its citizens. That's the basic idea behind the listening society. I know it can have certain connotations in post-communist countries where like the state was listening to you, but we take it as like a society that cares, an empathetic society that listens to its citizens and where everyone is seen and heard.
So what does this mean in practice? Of course, to really elaborate on this would require reading the book, but if you can go a bit more concrete.
Well, in practice, we can say that the current society we live in is very much concerned with the outer aspects of life, like our material conditions. Right? It sees to it that, that we are fed, that there's housing, that we have jobs, at least in a Scandinavian welfare state. It's very good at taking care of our material needs. But when it comes to our emotional needs, you're kind of on your own. If we take like Maslow's pyramid of needs, like the bottom. At the bottom, you have things such as food and shelter, and security. And these are very well taken care of in a Scandinavian welfare state. But when it comes to issues such as loneliness, self-esteem, self-actualization, you are on your own. And our idea with a welfare state 2.0 is that we also include these higher needs, right? That we see it as a political and societal issue that people feel alienated and alone, and that they have, poor relationships. We talk about Gemeinschaftspolitics, gemenskap in Swedish, or like roughly translated to fellowship into English, of seeing our relationships to each other as a political issue. But when we are talking about our relationship to each other, we should also include just as important relationship, namely our relationship to ourselves. And if we look at the need for self-esteem, we all have it. And sadly, too many of us go out of school with a very low self-esteem. We have learned like chemistry and some foreign language, but our self-esteem has been broken down, and feel worthless. Like this worthlessness feeling is just as big a part of modern society as alienation. So if we would see to it that the welfare states make it a priority that every child gets as strong as self-esteem as possible, and also that we just not live in this hamster wheel, that everyone gets a chance to actualize, self-actualize, to do the things of their dreams. And I think that with politics, I don't think that this is solely a individual issue. Of course, it's up to me to make the right choices, to develop relationships to others, to work on myself, and to do the things that I love. But politically, we can create much better conditions for people to flourish and to become happy. And what I think is the important thing here with political metamodernism, that is that we turn our gaze inwards. Yeah, that we not only this also, it's both, and it's also important that we have good material conditions. And I also think that it's only in a sufficiently developed economy where there is a material abundance that we can turn our gaze inwards and look at the emotional needs. So basically, that's what the listening society is about. It's about catering to the emotional needs of all citizens.
One thing that I've also found very resonating regarding especially like the political style of metamodernism, because for the listeners, maybe briefly, it's worth stating that there's like different branches of metamodernism, and your sort of interpretation or approach is emphasizing the political parts, but originally metamodernism is rooted in like art theory. But maybe we'll get a bit more in depth to that later. But one thing that I've found really resonating is when you, for example, observe internet discussions in our current ages, the amount or the obviousness of polarization and tribalization is hard to miss. And it's hard to say whether these times are more polarized than previous times, but at least the way the polarization sort of like comes on your face is of a particular style nowadays, since we have connection to people from so many different kinds of ideological and religious and political tribes. And one thing that I find that metamodernism gives at least one framework for is how to sort of start building bridges between people who look at the world from different perspectives. And I think that's also one of the central ideas in the listening society, that it's an approach to thinking about or developing society in a direction that helps us find ways to get along and build meaningful things together, regardless of our differences in worldview and paradigm.
Yeah, I think one of the greatest obstacles to transcending this polarization is that we don't understand the polarization, right? We think of it in terms of left and right, but actually it is not in, like it used to be, like political polarization was on a left and right scale, you know, like people, do you want more market or do you want more state? But everyone were within, like most people were within the modern, gravitating towards the modern value meme. Yeah, so they could still communicate. However, what we see now is that, you know, everyone has like politically coalesced in the middle. Yeah, that we have, you know, this social liberalism, and then people are polarized in terms of progressives and conservatives, or even, you know, reactionaries. And we still think of that as like a left-right divide, but in reality, you know, it is a matter of value meme, of developmental psychological stage. Yeah. Which is very sensitive to say that someone is less developed than others. But if we look at it, you know, it is often people who have more progressive values, who are gravitating towards postmodernism or metamodernism. That is a way of thinking that is more in tune with the current complexity of the society that we are in. I would say it is a fact, compared to, religious, fundamentalistic or nationalistic way of thinking. Not until progressives, because it's from there the insight should come, not before progressive understand this dynamic, will we be able to transcend it, right, and to create understanding. Because I believe understanding that people gravitate towards different effective value memes, it actually makes you more forgiving and increases your understanding that it's not that people have completely misunderstood how the world works. It is that they are at the limits of their cognitive complexity, and I need to learn their language, and also I need to learn their language and speak with them without antagonizing them. And I believe that having a developmental perspective on things will make you more forgiving and thus less antagonizing.
Yeah, I think what you just touched upon there regarding learning to speak the language of people is one of the most practical things I feel that I don't know if I got it out from Metamodernism, because it's something that I've been doing anyway, but it's like helped me understand what I'm doing. Yeah, like the basic idea of not requiring people who I disagree with approach my point of view, but taking responsibility for myself of being able to better understand where they are and understand what are some of the key values or concepts that they perceive in the world, and thinking about that as a privilege. That because a lot of the talk around privilege nowadays is focused on like people pointing out each other's privileges, but I find it really helpful to realize my own privileges. And
yes, that you can wrap your head around queer feminist and a critical approach to society. That's a very privileged perspective to have, to be able to do that. But these things is something that, integralism and spiral dynamics have been doing for decades. It's nothing we came up with. We were inspired by this stuff. What we did was, because we thought that the models were a bit simplified, was that we just applied Wilber's 4 quadrants on spiral dynamics. And then we came up with, these 4 dimensions of development, the 4 dimensions we should focus on in people's psychological development, complexity on one side, depth on the other, code, and then state. And your mental state is the one we should focus on politically, because it's the only thing that is, first of all, it's the only thing that's ethically viable, right? Because there's nothing, okay, now I need to develop everyone's level of complexity and their value memes so that I don't feel so alone, I have more people to talk to. No, people do not want to reach your enlightened state of development. You cannot reason like that. But everyone wants to increase their state. Yeah, everyone wants to do well, feel well. So that's what I think we should focus on politically. And also in relation to integral and spiral dynamics, what we have done is that we have secularized the stuff. We are not so much about spirituality. And then we have politicized it and created a political project. And that is what you will find in Nordic ideology. Initially, the listening society was just meant to be this introduction to our political philosophy. But then Hanzi just went on and wrote, and then it became too long. So we had to split it up. And then Nordic ideology came out 2 years later. And that is where Hanzi gives us something really unique, because there we have the 6 new forms of politics and a number of other unique political or societal perspectives. And 75% of the philosophical consensus is to be found in Nordic ideology. And this is a far more important book than Listening Society.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the sort of four axes of development and thinking about, is there any way to cover or give a brief description of them, because it's quite complicated and we have limited amount of time, but at least I think maybe it would be useful to give a brief description of what is an effective value meme so that people get a grasp on what we're talking about.
Right. First of all, people should buy our books and join my courses, because we tried to talk about these things before, and people never understood what we were talking about. So we had to together with Hanzi write these really fat books, and in order, people need to spend time with Hanzi for, I don't know, how many hours does it take to read a book like that? 20, 30 hours in order to really grasp it. But yeah, basically, modern society is this, science, rational, democratic society, that mainstream society. And postmodernism is the critique against modern society. That's where you have all the queer feminists and post-colonialism and all of this stuff. And then metamodernism is what comes after the critique, the synthesis or the proto-synthesis, because we know that all syntheses are preliminary. It's an ongoing project to synthesize the best of modernism and postmodernism. And people are inclined to gravitate either to one value meme or another. People can also gravitate to pre-modern value memes, have a very religious or fundamentalistic worldview. But really, I recommend that people just plunge into this stuff. It's on our website. It's in our books. Spiral Dynamics has been writing about this for years, and then you will gradually get a feeling for it. What we have done is that we have these four fields of development, of personal development, that it's not so easy just to say, oh, that person is modern or postmodern. And then, because what we noticed was that some people are very, very complex thinkers. But in terms of spiritual depth and wisdom, they're not so developed. And then often you can have a super complex thinker, but who gravitate towards mainstream modernism. Or the other way around, you can have really spiritual people, but they have a very low cognitive complexity, and are maybe barely able to grasp postmodern theory. So we found out that the spiral dynamics theory, it's a really good bad theory. It really hits the head on the nail, and it's intuitively. It just rings true. You get this intuitive feeling of, wow, yes, it fits so much into the greater scheme of all. But then after a while, it's just too simple to give people a color code, as they do in spiral dynamics. So the thing is that there's both cognitive complexity, there's depth, and it's also what is the code that people have been reading. A really if you take a person and that person is cognitively very, very complex and has a lot of spiritual depth and been meditating for 30 years but has not had access to latest postmodern philosophy or even modern philosophy, right? You'll see that in the scholastic period, that you have these geniuses, but all they had access to was the Bible and the interpretations thereof, and they remained pre-modern. So it's also important what kind of code you have in your system. And then there's, of course, state. State relates a lot to depth. Have you lived most of your life just never experienced the highs and the lows of life? Have you never been to hell and back to tell the story? Have you never seen the heavens? Have you never had a cosmic orgasm? Have you just had like a very normal life, and then that will inhibit the development of your depth, because you don't know, you don't have an experience that hell and heaven actually exists. So they're all interconnected, and development in one of the quadrants and one of these dimensions will enable development in another, right? So if you read the right books, it will be able to help you increase your cognitive complexity. If you have the right life experiences, it will increase your wisdom. It will increase your spiritual depth. And also spiritual depth and complexity can also enable each other. So it's really like a more holistic way to personal development. That's not like one thing you need to focus on. But politically, what we should focus on is state. We need to focus on happiness. And I know a lot of people don't like happiness, but I can assure you that happiness is good for you. And that's what we should focus on, political and also in our own lives.
How would you describe, like, what's the main point of criticism when people criticize the emphasis on happiness?
Well, often I think that people, they think of a hedonistic, like chocolate kind of happiness, that we are brought up to, consume this, enjoy that, and then I don't see that as happiness. Often people think of, so it's just like getting one dopamine kick after the other. That's like, no, you also need to like increase your serotonin levels like throughout the day. You also need some oxytocin from having good and loving relations and so on. But I would define happiness as, the subjective state of being happy, of feeling good. Throughout, most of your life. Because, of course, we all have this feeling of, you can even be unhappy and you can eat a delicious cake and then get a lot of dopamine into your brain from the sugar, but still be miserable, right? Happiness is a subjective state, but I think we have all been there. Like when I talk about happiness, we've all been there. We know what it is, and the trick is to have prolonged happiness throughout most of the moments of our life. Then some would criticize, but if we don't experience the lows and the pain, we won't understand what life is about, and we won't write any poetry and do any great artwork. But I said, don't worry, there's enough pain and suffering for everybody out there. So that's the least of our concerns, to think there's not enough misery out there. And especially as you evolve, as you increase your complexity, new pains will arise. If you have seen that for a lot of people who have experienced profound spiritual development, and then suddenly they're out of tune with the rest of society and they feel alienated. And the same with complexity. Suddenly everyone is fucking stupid. And you have learned all of these amazing things, and you know how the world works, and we can do this and that, and then no one understands what you say, and you have no one to talk to.
Yeah, I've been thinking quite a bit about how to describe, sort of giving a category for what metamodernism is. And I think one word that is somewhat helpful is a memeplex, that it's sort of a collection of ideas that sort of tend to hang together, and also the attractor point of view that you elaborate on the Nordic ideology book is quite good, and also the attractor point of view makes it easier to talk about the relationship between metamodernism and, you could say other attractors, such as I think post-rationality, integral, game B are some examples that are in some ways quite well aligned with metamodernism.
I would say it's like part of the same meta meme, right? When we talk about metamodernism, we talk about many different things. You mentioned the Dutch school, as it's often referred to, just looking at metamodernism as you would look at the Rococo, or the Impressionist, just a like a cultural phase, within the arts and architecture. And then you have the Nordic school, where you look at it as a developmental phase. And then you could look at it in terms of a societal, a state of societal development. And you can look at it as a state of psychological development. And that these two are related. They are not the same, but they are like dependent on each other, right? Of course, if we want to live in a metamodern society, enough people need to gravitate towards the metamodern value meme in order to, what's it called? Evolve into the metamodern. Yeah, we call it meta meme. It's all words, but I hope you understand. That's like we often talk about different things, and I would say that many of the people who come up, like Gandhi or Verwege or Schmachtenberger, they don't define themselves as metamodernists, but they're kind of part of the postmodern, right? And that's what I think is good about metamodernism, that compared to integralism, which is kind of like trademarked Ken Wilber, like you can say what is integral and what is not integral. Like integral is what Ken Wilber has written about, and whereas metamodernism is more of something we explore together. What could possibly come after postmodernism? No one can own that term. It's just like socialism or liberalism. So I think it's like a much broader term. And at the moment, I think that metamodernism is kind of like winning. This weekend, I was at a conference, and Alexander Bard, the philosopher, he's also an X Factor judge, but I think he's more interesting as a philosopher. He came down on his knees and said that, okay, I fucking hate the term, but it will now declare myself a metamodernism, because apparently that's what we're gonna call it. And it's often with these things that, okay, we need a name, right? And we need a name for what comes after postmodernism. And postmodernism, that's just no, it's just a shitty word. So, yeah.
Well, one criticism that you hear regarding both metamodernism in particular, and also like stage theories or developmental theories more broadly, is that they're too linear, in the sense that they can be interpreted as postulating a linear progression or evolution, some sort of like fatalistic pathway on which everyone should be developing along. How would you reply to that?
Well, it's also, you could say that Newton, he was very fatalistic about, apples falling to the ground. Of course, the apple won't fall to the ground if you catch it, right? And of course, if we start wiping each other out in some Mad Max climate collapse, we're not going to see a metamodern society. Maybe will happen now. Maybe we will regress back to something else. But I believe that the attractor point is pulling towards what we call a metamodern society, that if things are allowed to evolve, right, the end result will be something similar to what we're talking about. I also believe with evolution, we have seen throughout organic evolution that organisms have become more and more complex. Brains have become bigger. Organisms, like you see a development also in the inorganic world, that we've, like in the beginning there was just like hydrogen up there, and then over time you see more and more complex structures evolve. And then again, you could also say, oh, how can you say something is more complex than something else? Like the postmodern critique, it's just change. But then now what doesn't okay, it's change. Do you have a better way of speaking about that will, because of course complexity is just a language that we're making up. It's just a map. It's not reality. But at the moment, I believe talking in terms of complexity and stages gives us a much clearer picture of what is actually going on. And I also think that thinking in terms of stages, we can actually predict things. Our way of thinking should, of course, be put to the test. Is this something that is better at predicting things and also creating things than the ways of thinking and the theories that are currently available?
I'm thinking of whether to go deeper into that.
Like I wanted to say that, yeah, of course, if a comet hits, then like it is not fatalistic in the way that we don't know what happens. Yeah, but I believe that when we talk about attractor points, that it kind of avoids that trap of thinking that it is this linear progression. Yeah. We also see that throughout history that, there are ups and downs, Roman Empire, then just collapsed and societal complexity was on a lower level for 1,000 years until it started increasing again. But in the big picture, I think I'm a historian, and I think that this narrative of ever increasing complexity over time, from the when you zoom out, it's very, very clear to me.
Yeah, and also like one important aspect of the complexity, which also this way of phrasing it, I think borrows quite a bit from Ken Wilber, is that as the complexity increases, it tends to include or integrate lower stages of complexity in itself. I imagine if I'm thinking about a future society that I can imagine that has integrated more of the metamodern attractor, because I think a fear that many people have, for example, Nora Bateson, who has been talking critically about the and has also like spiced up the discussion regarding stage theories. I think one fear that she has is that there's like sort of one point of reference that everything is valued through. And I think what I perceive the metamodern perspective more and more evolving into is the ability to include a variety of different kinds of maps or different kinds of paradigms, and the way we'll also like developing our ability to have like dialogue and also like cooperation between different kinds. Just like a small world example, I've been thinking quite a bit about, because I have some friends who have sort of gone into the flat earth rabbit hole, and I've been thinking quite a bit about, because there's a lot of push in the current, how do you say, like current narratives regarding truth and making sense of the world. There's a lot of push for people to sort of turn their backs on people who are disagreeing on the basic premises of the world and what it means to make sense of the world. And I've been thinking quite a bit about when I stop having agreement with a friend on the most basic ways that we figure out the truth about the world, how do I still uphold friendship and human connection? And I think this is like a micro scale thing of what kind of a need the metamodern attractor is sort of born to give, I don't know, solutions, but at least like workable ways of dealing with the problem.
I don't know, like if you can still go out and have a beer and play chess with with a friend who's and then you just talk about something different. I wanted to reply to what you said before about this of including like more perspectives and I would say like my horror perspective would be that metamodernism would go the same route as Marxism, right? That I don't that we would have like a Freinachtism. That would be like the worst thing ever. I don't think that Marx had imagined that that people would be using his work as a Bible. The man was a scientist, and it's like it's implied in science that people should improve upon the work. I mean, like if people are still like we have failed if people are still reading our books in 20 years, right? Like if no one has come up with something better in 20 years and they're still like going, like if people start using Hanzi Freinacht like some kind of guru and the books as a Bible, and people start, this is like the correct way of interpreting metamodernism, then it's a complete failure. The good thing again about the term metamodernism is I think that it's inviting people into exploring together what comes after postmodernism, right? There's no correct way to be a metamodernist. And it is only together that we can co-create this new meta meme, or whatever we're going to call it. Maybe it's not going to be called any metamodernism or talk about meta memes and this. Maybe we're going to develop, hopefully we're going to develop a better language in 20 years. That's what I hope for. But I still believe that this developmental thought, this thought of progress, that there are some certain qualitative features to change over time, and that there is a direction. There might be many directions out there, but I believe that like what we need to do is that we need to ally, we need to identify and ally ourselves with the attractor points. Like see, where is the world soul going? Because it's only then you can identify what is possible. Like Gandhi, for example, saw that, okay, it's after the Second World War, like post-colonialism is on the rise. He just knew exactly which button to push, He didn't go against the wind. He just let himself, he saw where the winds were going, and, he just put up his sail, and he liberated a nation of 1 billion people. And that's how we should think. Like, where are the pressure points out there? Because with a developmental perspective and seeing like the gravitational pull of the attractor points out there, you can see, here's a pressure point, here's a pressure point, here's a pressure point. And it's kind of like you would rather want to just like flip one domino brick than fighting what they call windmills, right? And that's what I hope.
Yeah, like finding.
Yeah, and that's what I hope we can do with this way of thinking, and I think that's something that we can agree with postmodernism. That is that there is a preferable future out there. That there are improvements to the current state of the world that we would like to see happen. And then I just take my liberty to say that that's development and that's progress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when you were referring to my mention of friends who have gone different paths than me regarding like how to make sense of the world, I think they're going to have a beer and play chess. I have been doing that. That's a good thing to do, but still I think one of the main important questions is like, where do we as a society focus our resources? And if there's like disagreement, for example, on questions such as climate change.
Yeah. Well, if you have enough resources, if you have enough resources and really love this friend, then I think you should invite him on a tour around the globe. Could be fun.
Yeah. But yeah, I think like one thing that's often mentioned as one of the center, how would you say, like the most, I'm thinking of the English word, the thing that defines metamodernism already before you started writing about political metamodernism, it often got associated with the sort of new sincerity movement. And I think there's also one like practical point of contact that people can have when they try to figure out what Metamodern is actually about. Because even though I've been thinking about both Metamodernism and also similar attractors for quite some time, I often find myself struggling trying to define them to people who are not like acquainted with them. But yet the sincerity point of view, which there's often examples given through like music or movies. Like one thing that really hit some of the metamodern sensibility home for me was listening to the Future Islands famous live performance for the first time, which like integrates some sort of like like the performer, especially the singer of the band, is like acting a role, but at the same time you get the sense that he's like through that role providing that's really, really, really sincere in the way that you rarely see. And I think one of the important aspects of metamodernism is the tendency to try to find ways of being in touch with polarities or different sides of paradoxes. I think a good way also to describe that is that it's not just both and thinking, but it's both and either or
Exactly.
thinking. How you can
There are few people who are even capable of saying that. So well done.
If there's some like favorite examples for you regarding the kinds of paradoxes that metamodernism might have a tendency to embrace, maybe you can give them.
I don't know, but we have this like of sincere irony, yeah, and it's a concept that we have in common. Well, actually, we stole from the Dutch school, well, I'm just gonna mute this one just a moment. So there we go. Sincere irony, and I also because I think that we have like 25 years of postmodern irony, and the cynicism is like we are craving a new sincerity, right? And of course, if you don't believe in anything and you just have this shield, this armor of cynical irony, like after a while, you start to feel the thirst for something that actually means something. But today, like you cannot be sincere without irony, because it's not trustworthy, is it? Like if you are just like 100% sincere about something, it often becomes a bit creepy, and you take yourself and your sincerity on such too seriously. So we need this irony, like in the sincerity, right? And I think that's something you can find in the art world now. That okay, we kind of we have had our fair dose of South Park and Simpsons, and it's also in the art world that always, that's our theory at least, that we will write about that. Hanzi will write about that in his upcoming book, 6 Hidden Patterns of World History. That it's in the art world that you will see the first indications of a new meta meme emerging. Yeah. So if you want to see where the future is going, always go in the art world. Like the artists are capable of, like before the philosophers have the words and the concepts, the artists, they can kind of like feel, like a good artist can feel where things are going. Many artists, they're like blessed because they are like so closely, finely attuned to the attractor points. And they don't have a language, so they express themselves, in the visual arts or with music, even conceptual art. And then, like a little bit later, the philosophers will start, creating a language, and then it will gradually take place in society in general.
I guess an important way of how that happens is that before you can start elaborating a theory, you need to be thinking about it for quite a long time before you can get a sensible package together. But when it comes to art, if you can just align yourself, because metamodernism has also often been described, I think it was Van der Rack and Vermeulen who described this as a structure of feeling. So as an artist, you can just like get in touch with that particular kind of attractor and express through it, or express in a way that's informed by that. And in the movie world, some examples that are often given about metamodernism are Michel Gondry's and Charlie Kaufman's stuff, and like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is a movie that's often mentioned.
Yeah.
Also, I feel that Arrival by Denis Villeneuve was something that really grabbed the structure of feeling, or whatever you want to call that.
Yeah, I have another Memento and Crash, almost like 15, 20-year-old movies, I would say, are also Crash. I think it's like the 2004 or 5 edition. There's another one up there. And then there's, of course, also like The Fountain, like an integral favorite movie, but also touches upon many metamodern sensibilities.
Yeah, it's like being able to simultaneously hold the sort of ironic detachment, which provides a way to be profoundly sincere, as you said before, like without it appearing sort of cringy.
Yeah, if you want to explore metamodern, I don't think that you will become a good metamodern philosopher from like staying in a university department. Like, get your ass out of your office, go to a museum, go to an art museum, go to the streets and see what the street artists are coming up to. Listen to music, go to YouTube and see what 13-year-old girls are up to. Go out there in the world and discover discover art. I think it's one of the most inspiring and fruitful endeavors you can do as a philosopher. And you can discover the future by looking into good art.
Also, regarding embracing the paradoxes, you mentioned cynicism before. And the way I've thought about it is, I've also occasionally toyed with the phrase post-cynicism when it comes to metamodernism. And in a sense, it's not about rejecting cynicism, but more like seeing the place that cynicism actually does have in our world, and seeing where it lacks and where it sort of falls short. I think a good balance of cynicism and optimism makes it possible, in a sense, to transcend them both. Also, in Finnish, we have this. There's nice words that aren't directly translatable to English, because in Finnish, when there's the word for hope, which is toivo, and then there's epätoivo, which is translated as despair usually, but the direct translation would be like unhope.
Yeah.
And I think also, like, getting beyond the dichotomy of hope and unhope or despair is also a good like metamodern anchor, in the sense that you see that there's value in both, and there's also value in transcending those.
No, I really think that cynicism has stopped being cool, right? It like, to being this cynical, anti-thesis critic, okay. Don't think it cut it anymore. And I think that a lot of young people out there are just hungering for someone with more sincerity, and someone who dares to make a fool out of yourself, right? Because that's the thing about, okay, all this irony, cynicism, it's like an armor, yeah. And if you just like criticizing everything around you, but you never come up with anything, like you're very protected, right? But after a while, it doesn't lead anywhere. I would like, before I have to go in 5 minutes, I would like to read. It's from 1997 I would like to quote the American novelist David Foster Wallace.
I was just about to quote him, so.
Oh, you were about to do it. Okay.
No. You have a direct quote.
I have it on my screen here. Real rebels, as far as I can see, risk disapproval. Like real rebels risk disapproval. The old postmodern insurgents risk the gasp and squeal, shock, disgust, outrage, censorship, accusations of socialism, anarchism, nihilism. Today's risks are different. The new rebels might be artists willing to risk the yawn, the rolled eyes, the cool smile, the nut ribs, the parody of gifted ironists, the "oh, how banal." To risk accusations of sentimentality, melodrama, of overcredulity, of softness, of willingness to be suckered by a world of lurkers and starers who fear gaze and ridicule above imprisonment without law. Who knows? I would say this is one of like the first like examples in literary of like a true metamodern. Well, it's a clarion call for a metamodern wave, and and it's going to be quoted in, and we're writing another Hanzi book. It's going to be called like 12 Much Better Rules for Life, and hopefully it will be out before Christmas. Now I've put a little bit pressure on myself to have it done. So wonderful. I'm gonna go home, and then I'm gonna kick Hanzi in the butt, and yeah, hopefully there will be more metamodern content coming to you soon.
You need to go at this minute, or do I have space for tiny final questions?
4 minutes.
4 minutes, okay. Regarding David Foster Wallace, Infinite Jest was just translated to Finnish. I've yet to read it, but looking forward to it. And willing to be informedly naive and willing to be ridiculed because you believe in a better future in a way that has integrated also the important part that the cynical and critical approaches to like believing in a progressive society, I think is like in the core of the metamodern ethos.
To be 100% Machiavellian and 100% idealistic. That is what is required.
Yeah. So I have shitloads of questions that need to be spared for a future discussion, hopefully, but I have short final questions that I ask from everyone, so you can reply with one sentence or more, whichever way you want. So first question, an early memory that has affected the course of your life.
An early memory of something that has... Well, when I was 5 years old, I fell out of a window and broke my arm. I remember flying there in the air and then hitting the ground. Like, oh shit, what did I just do?
How did it affect you?
I don't know. I had this idea of God intervening, and maybe it has impacted my life in a way that that I feel somehow protected by a higher being out there.
Surprising. A thing that inspires you.
A thing that inspires me. I am inspired by a good night's sleep. I'm inspired of going home to my beautiful wife and have a kiss and a meal. Normal, everyday life.
A thing that scares you.
Wasps. Terrified of wasps.
If things go well, where will you be 5 years from now?
I don't know where I will be in terms of geography, but I hope that I will just be living a good life with my family, and that we will, have a nice house, and we will have enough time to love each other, and I will have enough adventures with my work at Metamodern. Just a normal life.
Okay, so people can follow you through metamodern.org. Also, Hanzi Freinacht's Facebook page is probably worth following. And can people
and on Twitter, and you can also follow me on Facebook and all that jazz.
Yeah, wonderful. So, final, your greetings or prayer or wish or whichever to the human race.
It's a good question. I would like to come up with a good answer. I would really want to come up with a good answer. Let's save it for next time.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, take care.
Okay, well, that was my discussion with Emil Ejner Friis, the co-founder at the Metamodern, a think tank, and one of the visionaries of Metamodernism. A 1 hour discussion provides a limited possibility to really get in-depth discussion of the themes that we were covering there, but at least I think that provided a brief glimpse of Metamodernism, or into Metamodernism and into Emil Ejner's and Hanzi Freinacht's work. And yeah, I hope to do follow-up discussions in the future, because I really feel that this was just scratching the surface. But and also I'd say that Metamodernism is not an easy concept to grasp. I've been reading and thinking about it for a couple of years now, and still I find it challenging to give an elevator pitch description of what it's actually about when people ask about it. But yeah, if you find yourself interested, no doubt you will be marinating yourself in metamodern material, of which this podcast was just like one viewpoint into. It's like, as we discussed a bit in the end, no one has a final say on metamodernism. It's not a static thing. It's more of a process that's sort of like an open source movement that's developing and self-organizing on its own. But yeah, okay. If you enjoy the podcast, I recommend subscribing on your favorite provider, following on social media, and also consider becoming a Patreon supporter. And then until the next time, thank you.